Ukraine. Launched last April, the Register of Damage for those affected by Russia's aggression enabled to work on the compensation mechanism. Furthermore, the European Court of Human Rights is dealing with over 4,000 cases against Russia related to events Crimea, Donbass, and wider war against Ukraine. While war crimes, crimes against humanity, and genocide can be prosecuted by the International Criminal Court, the crime of aggression can only be prosecuted by the Special Tribunal. The Baltic states have continuously advocated for a strong and effective special tribunal that would be empowered to bring justice for the crime of aggression against Ukraine, having broad cross-regional support. This March, the co-group, consisting of senior legal experts of Ukraine, 37 states, the EU and the Council of Europe have marked a significant step towards ensuring full accountability by finalizing the technical work on 3 draft documents necessary for the establishment of the Special Tribunal for the crime of aggression against Ukraine that will now be submitted for political consideration. Impunity leads to repeated crimes. This must stop. No one from Russia's highest political and military leadership is untouchable. Accountability also forms an integral part of the comprehensive, just and lasting peace. We stand by Ukraine and reiterate a call on Russia to respect its obligations under the international law, including the UN Charter, as well as international human rights and humanitarian law. The Baltic states support efforts aimed at reaching a comprehensive, just and lasting peace in Ukraine in line with the UN Charter and international law. I thank you, Madam President.
I thank the representative of Lithuania for the statement. I now give the floor to His Excellency Mr. Stavros Lambrinidis, Head of the Delegation of the European Union to the United Nations.
Madam President, thank you for convening this important meeting and for giving the European Union the opportunity to take the floor. The candidate countries Montenegro, Albania, Ukraine, the Republic of Moldova, Bosnia and Herzegovina, and Georgia, Liechtenstein, and as well as Monaco and San Marino aligned themselves with this statement. Let me kick off, as so many others have, by thanking Assistant Secretary General Msuya for highlighting once again the dramatic humanitarian consequences of Russia's illegal, unprovoked and unjustified aggression against Ukraine. 3 main points require special stressing. First, Russia must uphold international law and cease its missile and drone attacks on Ukraine's civilians, infrastructure, and densely populated areas now. While its president states Russia can agree to a limited ceasefire, its continued military actions demonstrate the exact contrary. Every day, successive deliberate attacks and aerial bombardments cause more death and destruction. Its campaign of systematic airstrikes against Ukraine's civilians and civilian critical infrastructure violates international humanitarian law and must stop immediately. We have heard from OCHA the impact on the most vulnerable households. According to the UN Human Rights Monitoring Mission, these attacks are not accidental, but have been of a widespread and systematic nature. The Office of the High Commissioner for Human Rights has further documented over 12,000 civilians killed over the past 3 years, of which over 600 were children. And let me open a parenthesis to say that the gall of the Russian Federation in this room today to accuse others of a lack of conscience in the face of such brutality is both unseemly and unconscionable and frankly shameful. For shame, for shame. There can be no impunity for these atrocities. Russia and its leadership must be held fully accountable for waging a war of aggression and for other most serious crimes under international law. Second point, full, safe, rapid and unhindered humanitarian access needs to be ensured. We commend the efforts of OCHA and its humanitarian partners in providing assistance to those in need. The UN has repeatedly highlighted the challenge of reaching civilians in areas under temporary Russian occupation. This means an estimated 1.5 million people are being cut off from humanitarian aid. While it wages a war of aggression, Russia shows no concern for the well-being of civilians in the areas it temporarily occupies. In accordance with international humanitarian law, it must facilitate full, safe, rapid, and unimpeded passage of humanitarian relief for all civilians in need. As is the case for all crises around the world, the European Union and its member states will continue to contribute generously to the United Nations humanitarian response, also in Ukraine. We call on all nations to step up their support as well. The European Union remains committed to support Ukraine's repair, recovery and reconstruction in coordination with their international partners. The Ukraine Recovery Conference in July 2025, hosted by Italy, will be important in this context. Third point, the European Union reiterates its support for a comprehensive, just and lasting peace in Ukraine based on the UN Charter and international law. 1 month ago, the General Assembly gave an overwhelming message to call on the aggressor to immediately, completely and unconditionally withdraw all its military forces from the entire territory of Ukraine. 1 month ago, that was the General Assembly of the United Nations speaking. We welcome all efforts towards reaching a comprehensive, just and lasting peace in line with the UN Charter and international law. We welcome the efforts of the United States and Saudi Arabia in hosting the ongoing discussions. The proposal of a ceasefire, if accepted by Russia, can be an important step in this direction. It is now for Russia to show its willingness to achieve peace. The European Union is ready to play its full part in supporting upcoming steps, together with Ukraine and other partners. As we have stressed repeatedly, there can be no negotiations on Ukraine without Ukraine, and no negotiations that affect European security without Europe. In closing, Madam President, I reaffirm the European Union's unwavering support for Ukraine's independence, sovereignty and territorial integrity within its internationally recognized borders. The European Union will continue to support Ukraine for as long as it takes and as intensely as needed to achieve a comprehensive, just and lasting peace in line with the UN Charter and the principles of sovereignty and territorial integrity applicable to all nations. Thank you, Madam President.
And I thank Ambassador Lambrinidis for his statement. I now give the floor to the representative of Poland.
Madam President, Poland aligns itself with the statement delivered by the European Union. I would like to express our gratitude to the Danish presidency for calling this timely meeting, and our appreciation to France and Panama for requesting it, as well as to Joyce Msuya for her presentation. While many look forward to restoring peace for Ukraine and stability in Europe, the events of last week's, listed moments ago by the distinguished representative of Ukraine, cast a dark shadow on those hopes. Reports indicate that Russian forces launched massive attacks against Ukraine, deploying a staggering number of Shahid drones, decoys, and ballistic missiles. This demonstrates that Russia, regrettably, does not seem genuinely interested in ceasing its illegal war against Ukraine, despite growing international calls for peace. Madam President, Russia disregards fundamental international norms and principles, a fact tragically evident in its ongoing attacks on Ukraine's civilian population and deliberate targeting of energy and civilian infrastructure. These actions have resulted in frequent and widespread power and heating outages, leaving millions vulnerable. Poland continues to respond to Ukraine's critical needs on a bilateral basis, including by providing vital equipment and increasing energy exports to help alleviate the suffering caused by this relentless aggression. The recent political momentum underscores Ukraine's resolve to pursue meaningful advancement towards peace negotiations. The key ingredient to unlock a peaceful future is, regrettably, still absent, and that is Russia's genuine and constructive commitment to pursuing a negotiated settlement. It must be more than a mere pause, allowing the aggressor to rearm and strike again, as it had done before. It must instead meet a number of criteria. Cease all attacks on civilian population. Be agreed with and accepted by all stakeholders, first and foremost Ukraine, but also Europe. Guarantee Ukraine's independence and sovereignty, enabling her to freely choose her leaders, control her borders, and decide upon her future integration aspirations. Addressing root causes, Madam President, is a challenge because they lie squarely within Russian decision-making processes when repeatedly choosing war over peace and aggression over diplomacy. Perhaps it is frustrating that the neo-colonial attempts to rebuild Soviet empire by force and coercion continue to fail, as they should. In conclusion, I would like to reiterate that Ukraine is not a helpless victim of aggression. Ukraine fights back. Ukraine has allies around the world, including the European Union and Poland. Our commitment for justice and peace will not waver, and our pursuit of a just resolution will continue. I thank you.
I thank the representative of Poland for the statement, and I now give the floor to the representative of Romania.
Thank you very much, Madam President, and I also want to start by thanking you for allowing my delegation to take the floor, but also for keeping this important topic related to the peace and security of Ukraine on this Council agenda. Romania aligned also with the statement delivered by the European Union, and I would like to reiterate Romania's full support for Ukraine's independence, sovereignty and territorial integrity within its internationally recognized borders. We share with Ukraine the longest border of an EU member state by land, rivers and sea. We are disappointed that the dialogue efforts and the proposals in the last weeks are yet to be met by deeds. Since the night of 21st of March, Russia launched new massive air attacks, mostly against civilian targets in Ukrainian cities, including Odessa, Zaporizhia, Sumy, and the Ukrainian capital, that have created and produced numerous casualties. Just last night, the city port of Nikolaev was attacked, as well as the Krivoy Rog in the disputed part. All these casualties will be referenced in future reports of the Office of the High Commissioner for Human Rights and UN OCHA, just as the previous ones in the past more than 3 years. But this cycle of violence can and should be discontinued. Romania is of the opinion that any ceasefire needs to include in its scope and objectives respect for international humanitarian law and the protection of all civilians without discrimination. The path to peace means also bringing dignity to all victims of the war. We welcome ongoing efforts by the United States towards a ceasefire and safe navigation in the Black Sea. Madam President, as Romania always underlined, the Black Sea matters not only for our region but for the whole world. Discussions in Riyadh earlier this week acknowledged my country has been involved in multiple efforts to tackle shortages of food or supply chains created by the Russian aggression on Ukraine, ever since the Black Sea Grain Initiative was still in place, and we have informed the Council all along. Romania has facilitated the export of over 70 million tons of goods, of which 55 million tons of grains, to ensure the continuity of the global supply chain. At the same time, the European Union created the European Solidarity Lanes, which made use of the Romanian infrastructure alongside other neighbouring countries to Ukraine to make available food products to the global market. In closing, Madam President, our long-standing position since day one of the Russian invasion of Ukraine has been very clear. The achievement of a comprehensive, just and lasting peace needs to be in line with the UN Charter and the principles of sovereignty and territorial integrity applicable to all nations. Thank you, Madam President.
I thank the representative of Romania for the statement, and I now give the floor to the representative of Finland.
Thank you, Madam President. I have the honor to address the Council on behalf of the Nordic countries, Denmark, Iceland, Norway, Sweden, and my own country, Finland. And I thank the Assistant Secretary General for her briefing. To achieve peace, we have to talk about its contours, and we note the ongoing